son to live in a house the size of a walk-in closet, and I don't regret a single second of it. But now my entire family is calling me a monster, and my ex-wife is threatening to take me to court for child endangerment. Imagine coming home to find your lifelong collection of vintage records snapped in half, your kitchen walls smeared with literal filth, and your younger daughter crying in the corner because her brother told her he'd get rid of her while you were at work. This wasn't a one-time thing. It was the climax of 3 years of pure, unadulterated psychological warfare waged by a 14-year-old who knew exactly how to manipulate every system meant to help him. I had tried therapy, boot camps, and endless gentle parenting sessions that only seemed to give him more ammunition to use against us. So I finally snapped and bought a 12 by 12 foot shed in the middle of a remote plot of land and told him that was his new reality. Was I wrong for finally choosing the safety of my daughter and my own sanity over the comfort of a child who refused to be a human being? Or would you have done the same thing if your home had become a literal war zone? I need you to listen to the whole story before you judge me. Because what led up to that moving day is something most parents couldn't even imagine in their worst nightmares. To understand how we got to the tiny house exile, you have to understand who Leo was before the darkness took over. When he was little, he was bright, maybe a bit too smart for his own good, but he was my world. Then the divorce happened. My ex-wife, Sarah, moved 3 states away and pretty much checked out, leaving me with full custody of a preteen who decided that I was the primary target for every ounce of rage he felt toward the world. By the time he hit 13, Leo wasn't just acting out. He was a professional bridge burner. He got expelled from 2 different middle schools for things I can't even mention without the hair on my neck standing up. It started with pranks that weren't funny, like hiding my car keys when I had a presentation or, accidentally, deleting months of work from my laptop. Then it escalated to animal cruelty. Nothing permanent, thank God, but he would scare the neighbor's cat until it stopped coming around, laughing the whole time. My youngest, Maya, who is only 8, became his favorite target. He'd whisper things to her in the hallway when I wasn't looking, telling her the monsters under her bed were real, and that they were hungry for little girls. I spent thousands on high-end child psychologists who all told me the same thing. He's highly intelligent, lacks empathy, and is testing the boundaries of his environment. But testing boundaries is one thing, burning the house down is another. I remember one specific night where I sat him down and tried to have a heart-to-heart. I was crying, pouring my soul out, telling him how much I missed the little boy who used to love building Legos with me. He just sat there eating a bag of chips, and when I finished, he looked at me and asked if I was done because he wanted to go back to his Xbox. He had this terrifying ability to look right through you, as if your pain was just a boring TV show he was forced to watch. He started stealing money from my wallet, not because he needed it. I bought him everything, but just to see if he could get away with it. When I confronted him, he'd lie with such conviction that I'd almost start questioning my own memory. He'd gaslight me into thinking I'd misplaced the money, or he'd turn it around and say I was abusing him by accusing him of theft. It was a constant state of mental fog. Every morning I woke up with a knot in my stomach, wondering what the daily disaster would be. I remember one Tuesday morning specifically, I found my morning coffee tasted like straight bleach. He had poured a small amount in the pot just to see my reaction. When I choked it up, he didn't even flinch. He just said, "You should probably clean the machine more often, Dad." That was the level of calculated cruelty I was dealing with. He wasn't a child. He was a predator in a hoodie. My house, which should have been my sanctuary, felt like a minefield. I found myself checking under my car tires before driving to work, because he'd once laid out nails to pop them. I couldn't trust him for a single second. The social workers I called were useless. They'd come over, see a clean house and a well-spoken kid, and tell me I needed to work on my communication style. They didn't see the way he looked at Maya when their backs were turned. They didn't see the notebooks he kept where he'd draw graphic pictures of the house on fire. I felt completely and utterly alone in my own family. The breaking point happened on a Tuesday. I came home from a grueling 10-hour shift to find the front door wide open. Panic surged through me, because Maya should have been home with the sitter. I ran inside to find the sitter, a sweet college girl named Emily, in tears. She told me Leo had locked her in the basement for 3 hours by jamming a chair under the handle, and then proceeded to redecorate the living room. He hadn't just made a mess. He had systematically destroyed every item of value I owned. My grandfather's watch? Smashed. My television? Shattered with a baseball bat. But worst of all, he had taken Maya's favorite stuffed animals. The ones our mother gave her before she passed, and decapitated them with kitchen shears, lining them up on her bed like a scene from a horror movie. Maya was hiding in the bathroom, shaking. Leo was just sitting on the sofa, scrolling on his phone, looking as calm as if he were waiting for a bus. When I asked him why, he just looked at me with those cold, dead eyes and said, "I was bored, Dad. And you're always so stressed. I figured I'd give you something real to cry about." That was the moment something inside me broke. I realized that as long as he was under my roof, Maya wasn't safe, and I wasn't a father anymore. I was a warden in a prison of my own making. I looked at the wreckage of my life scattered across the floor, and realized that if I didn't take drastic action, Leo would end up behind bars or Maya would end up permanently traumatized. I spent that entire night sitting in the dark living room while they slept, staring at the wall. I realized that the modern world was Leo's playground. He used his phone to bully people, he used the internet to find ways to manipulate me, and he used the comfort of our home as a shield. If I took away the comfort, if I took away the audience, what would be left? I thought about those old-school stories of men going into the wilderness to find themselves, and I realized that was exactly what he needed. Not a vacation, but a total disconnection from the society he was so intent on destroying. I didn't scream. I didn't hit him. I just walked out, called my brother, and told him I needed to use his hunting property up north. It was a rugged, isolated piece of land with nothing on it, but a small tool shed he'd converted into a tiny house for weekend trips. It had a composting toilet, a single burner stove, a small solar panel for one light, and a bunk. No Wi-Fi. No cellular service for miles. No neighbors to terrorize. I spent the next 48 hours packing Leo's essentials. Clothes, books, and a manual for how to live off-grid. I told him we were going on a trip. He thought I was finally taking him to that theme park he'd been demanding. He even had this smug little smirk on his face as we drove, thinking he'd finally broken me, and I was rewarding him for his behavior. He was talking about all the expensive food he was going to make me buy him, and which rides we were going to go on first. I just kept my eyes on the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. When we pulled up to that tiny, weathered wooden box in the middle of the woods, the look on his face shifted from smugness to genuine confusion. I didn't say a word as I started unloading his bins of clothes and the crates of non-perishable food. I told him, "This is your new home, Leo. You don't like my rules? Fine. Here, there are no rules, but there are also no luxuries. You want to eat? You learn to cook on that stove. You want to be bored? Well, you have plenty of trees to talk to. You're not coming back until you can prove to me that you won't destroy the lives of the people who love you." He started screaming then, calling me every name in the book, threatening to burn the shed down, threatening to run away. I just looked at him and said, "Run where? It's 20 miles to the nearest town. If you burn this down, you'll be sleeping in the dirt. Choice is yours." I turned the truck around and drove away, ignoring the sight of him in the rearview mirror throwing his boots at the bumper. I cried the whole way home. Not because I missed him, but because of the sheer weight of what I had just done. I felt like a failure of a father. Yet I felt a strange, cold relief for my daughter. So that's where things stood. I left him there with enough food for a week and told him I'd be back every Sunday to check on him and resupply him if, and only if, he hadn't trashed the place. Before I tell you about the absolute chaos that erupted when my family found out, and the shocking thing Leo did during his first week in the world's tiniest house, I want you to stop and think about this. I had tried everything else. I was desperate. I was protecting my daughter. So please pause right now and comment below. Was this tough love taken too far, or was it a necessary lesson in consequences? Would you have the guts to drop your kid off in the middle of nowhere for their own good? The first few days were silent. I went back to a home that felt like a tomb. But for the first time in years, Maya was sleeping through the night. She wasn't looking over her shoulder. She wasn't crying. But then the phone calls started. My ex-wife, Sarah, somehow found out. Probably because Leo managed to hike 2 miles to a ranger station to use their emergency phone. She called me screaming, calling me a kidnapper and a child abuser. She threatened to call the police, to have me arrested, to take Maya away from me. I told her, if you want him so badly, come get him. He's all yours. But you know exactly why he's out there. He destroyed everything I own, and he's terrorizing our daughter. If you take him, he stays with you permanently. No more weekend drop-offs. That shut her up real quick, because she knew she couldn't handle him for more than a weekend without calling me to take him back. She's all talk and no action, a Disney parent, who wanted the fun parts of having a son without any of the responsibility. She actually had the nerve to say, well, he's just expressing his trauma. I told her his trauma didn't give him the right to create new trauma for his sister. Then my brother called, the one who owned the land. He was worried about the liability. I told him I'd sign whatever papers I needed to, but I wasn't budging. My own mother told me I was being cruel, and that he's just a boy going through a phase. I asked her if her phase included decapitating toys and locking people in basements. She had no answer. I stood my ground, even when my sister sent me links to articles about isolation trauma. I told them all the same thing. The trauma was happening inside my house, and I was finally putting a stop to it. I spent that first week constantly checking the weather reports. If it rained, I felt a pang of guilt. If it got cold at night, I wondered if he was shivering. But then I'd look at Maya, who was finally coloring in her books again without looking at the door every 5 seconds, and my heart would harden again. When Sunday rolled around, I drove back up to the tiny house, expecting to find it burned down or Leo gone. I had spent the whole drive with my heart pounding, wondering if I'd find a crime scene or an empty shed. I had visions of him having run away and gotten lost in the woods, or having hurt himself out of spite. Instead, I found him sitting on the porch steps. He looked dirty, tired, and for the first time, he looked humbled. His hair was a mess and he had soot on his face from trying to work the stove. He hadn't broken anything. In fact, he had spent the week carving a piece of wood into a crude shape. He didn't yell at me. He didn't even swear. He just looked up and asked, "Can I have some more matches?" I ran out trying to keep the stove going. I realized then that when you remove the audience, the performer stops performing. Leo's whole identity was built on reacting to me, on shocking me, on pushing my buttons. Out there, with only the wind and the trees, there were no buttons to push. There was only the cold reality of survival. He told me he'd spent the first 2 nights crying, because he was scared of the dark. For a kid who acted like a hardened criminal, he was still just a boy who didn't know how to handle being alone with his own thoughts. He told me about the sounds the woods made at night, the owls, the rustling leaves, the wind through the pines. He said at first he tried to stay awake with a knife in his hand, thinking something was coming for him. But by the 3rd night, he was so exhausted from chopping wood and trying to haul water from the stream that he just crashed. He didn't have the energy to be angry anymore. We sat there in silence for an hour. He didn't apologize. Leo doesn't do apologies, but he talked about how quiet it was. He talked about how he realized that when there's no one around to trigger or shock, his anger didn't have anywhere to go but inward. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in a decade. He actually admitted that he liked the silence. He liked not having to be the bad kid for a while because there was no one there to see it. He asked me if I was still mad. I told him I wasn't mad, I was just done. I told him that I loved him, but I loved Maya too, and I couldn't let him hurt her anymore. He nodded. He didn't argue. He just asked for some more canned peaches and a book on how to identify local plants. I didn't bring him home that day. I left him there for another 2 weeks. Each week he got a little more self-reliant. He started reading the books I left, mostly survival guides and some classic literature. He started keeping the tiny house meticulously clean because he realized that if he made a mess, he was the only one who had to live in it. One Sunday, I brought him a steak and some fresh vegetables. We grilled them over a small fire he'd built himself. He showed me a birdhouse he'd tried to construct out of scrap wood and pine needles. It was ugly as sin, but it was the first thing he'd created instead of destroyed in years. He told me he'd seen a deer near the shed, and instead of trying to throw something at it, he'd just watched it. "It didn't care that I was there, Dad," he said. "It just kept eating." I think that was the first time he realized he wasn't the center of the universe. The climax of this whole ordeal came when I finally told him it was time to come home. I thought he'd jump in the truck and never look back. Instead, he looked at the tiny house, then at me and said, "I think I want to stay for one more week. I'm not ready to be around people yet. I'm afraid if I go back now, I'll start being that other person again." It was like he'd finally found a reset button in that 12-foot space. He needed to be sure that the change was real. He needed to know he could control himself without the isolation. I let him stay. That final week, I visited him, and we didn't even talk about the past. We talked about the birdhouse. We talked about the stars. When he finally did return, he was different. He wasn't cured. Life isn't a movie, but the monster was gone. He walked into the house, looked at Maya, and just said, "I'm sorry about your toys. I'll buy you new ones with my allowance." He actually hugged her. It was a stiff, awkward hug, but it was a hug. Maya looked at me with wide eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, she didn't look afraid. My ex-wife still hates me and still sends me nasty emails from her lawyer about how she's going to use this neglect to get full custody, but I know she won't. She doesn't want the work. And my neighbors still whisper about the crazy dad who exiled his son, but for the first time, my house feels like a home instead of a battlefield. I had to be the villain in his story to save him from becoming the villain in everyone else's. My family eventually backed off when they saw the results. My mother, who called me a monster, saw Leo calmly helping me wash the dishes and burst into tears. She couldn't believe it was the same kid. I told her it wasn't about being mean. It was about removing the noise. Leo had been screaming for attention by destroying things, so I gave him a place where no amount of destruction would matter. He learned that his actions have a direct impact on his own quality of life. He realized that if he didn't chop wood, he was cold. If he didn't cook, he was hungry. If he didn't clean, he lived in filth. In the real world, I was the one fixing all those things for him, so he never saw the consequences. Now he's back in school, making bees, and actually helping Maya with her homework. He still has his moments, sure. He can be moody and quiet, but the malice is gone. He's joined a woodworking club at school, and he spends his weekends in the garage building furniture instead of in the living room smashing it. He recently finished a small bookshelf for Maya's room. It's solid oak, and he spent weeks sanding it down until it was smooth as silk. When he gave it to her, he told her it was unbreakable. A little nod to the toys he'd destroyed. Maya loves it. She keeps her favorite books on it, and tells everyone her big brother made it for her. My relationship with Leo is still a work in progress. We go on hikes now, just the two of us, and we don't use our phones. We talk about the future, about what he wants to do when he graduates. He's thinking about forestry or maybe construction. He likes working with his hands. He likes seeing something tangible come from his effort. Looking back, I realize that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is be the person your child hates the most for a little while. We live in a world where we're told to never let our kids feel discomfort, but discomfort is where growth happens. We try to bubble wrap our children, to protect them from every hardship, but all we're doing is raising people who don't know how to handle reality. If I had kept him in that house, he would have ended up in a real prison or worse. He would have eventually done something he couldn't take back. I saved my son by letting him be alone, until he found himself. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, sitting in my living room knowing my son was miles away in a shed, but it was also the most necessary. I saved my daughter's childhood, and I saved my son's future. It's a long road to total healing, but we're on it. And for the first time in a long time, I can breathe without feeling like the ceiling is about to collapse. The tiny house is still out there, and sometimes Leo asks if we can go up there for a weekend just to get away from the noise of the city. We went last month, and he spent the whole time fixing the roof. He said it was his place, and he wanted to take care of it. That was the moment I knew I'd made the right call. I turned a destructive force into a constructive one. Like this video if you think I did the right thing by putting my daughter's safety first, and giving my son a much-needed reality check. Subscribe for more stories where the bad guy might actually be the one trying to save the day. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. I want to know if you think the tiny house method should be a real thing, or if I just got lucky. I'll see you all in the next story.